I am normal. Hi, my name's
That's
Maria.
adorable.
And I'm a completely normal person.
I said you're adorable.
Okay, adorable. I thought you said you're normal.
No.
Okay. I'm Maria. I'm adorable and normal.
Okay.
And I'm going to show you how to make this notebook cover today. It's got a pocket. You can put stuff in there. You can put a bunch of pencils here. I just have one pencil. And then you can draw or write things. So here's all the stuff that's in your kit for making the notebook cover. You've got your notebook, which is important, and we have 3 pieces of quilting cotton, one for the exterior, one for the lining, and one for the contrast. There's also a piece of fusible fleece, some thread, elastic, a button, and your instructions. We'll also be using these sewing supplies to help make the notebook cover. So for cutting, we're going to take the typewriter fabric, which is going to be the exterior of the notebook cover. And what we need is to get a piece of the lining, which is the solid, and the fusible fleece to be all roughly the same size. We'll set aside the contrast for now. We're going to cut that later. I'm not cutting it exact right now. I'm just cutting them all roughly the same size, and then we're going to quilt it before we cut it to the size we actually need. And out of the rest of your solid, we need to cut out 2 pieces for the inside cover lining. Out of your contrast fabric, we need to cut 2 pieces for the inside cover and 1 piece for the inside pocket. Now we're going to fuse the exterior piece to the fusible fleece. Just make sure you've got the bumpy side up and the fabric goes on top. So the exterior is fused to the fleece. I'm going to set that aside. With the piece that was the same size as the exterior, your lining, we're going to fold that in half and mark the center. Basically, we need to have it at the top and bottom here. I'm going to just finger press it and see how that works. Then I'm going to place this against the exterior fabric. And I need to mark a line that is 2 inches across, 1/4 of an inch down from this edge. The 1/4 inch mark, and use my handy little chalk. So I've got my center, I've got a 1/4 inch mark line across here, and I've marked 2 inches over the center. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. This is how we're going to be creating our notebook spine. And now we need to sew across there and across here, and I want to be very precise. That's why I marked it. And I don't want to stitch past here at all. I'm just going to start right here and stop right here, back stitching at the beginning and end, and the same thing on that one. So I went past my line just a little bit when I backstitched, so I'm going to take 1 stitch out, but I did reinforce it after that, so it's going to be fine. I'm just being picky about it because I want the spine to be straight. Okay, so now, before we turn it right side out, I am just going to do a tiny little snip in the seam allowance at the end of each stitch. And now we can flip it. This, you can see the seam allowance now will come out like that, and that's going to be the finished edge of the spine. I'm just gonna try to line up the edges a little bit. I'll probably go and press it real quick. And then we're gonna mark lines for our quilting and sew that. So you can choose whatever design you want to quilt your book cover. I've decided to do some vertical lines on the spine, and then I'm gonna do diagonal lines on the front and back. I'm just gonna start by marking these. I'm pinning it in a few places just to keep it from shifting. If you have safety pins, this is going to be a lot less painful for you, but I don't have any right now. So I have put a walking foot on, because that's always better when you're doing quilting, but if you don't have a walking foot, it's okay. So I did my vertical lines on the spine, and now I'm gonna do diagonal lines between the typewriters, and I'm not gonna mark this, I'm just gonna wing it and just draw little lines between the rows, and then diagonal lines going that way as well. So I have the first set of diagonal lines, and now I'm going to cross them all going in between here. What do you think, Luna? Is it good?
She doesn't seem to care that much.
No, she doesn't care. Okay, so now the next thing to do when you're done quilting is to square it up and make sure that it's all pretty straight. So I'm centering the very middle of the spine on this line in my mat. I'm not really using the numbers, I'm just using those squaring up lines so that I know I'll have equal amounts on either end. So what I've ended up with is around 13 3/4 by 9 3/8. Leaves enough room for a little seam allowance to create our notebook cover. So this is our inside pocket, and I'm just gonna hem the top edge of it, so I'll fold it down 2 times and then sew it. So now we'll take our hemmed pocket and put it on one of the inside cover pieces. And we're just gonna sew the 3 sides close to the edge just to hold it in place. So this is the inside cover for one side, and on the other side we're going to have elastic that you can put your pens and pencils in. So I'm going to just draw a line through the center so I know where to put the elastic. Okay, so I've done a few, and I figured out how far I need to go to be able to put a pencil in for it to hold nicely. I decided not to give it any slack at all because that made it too loose. I also just threw a scrap of fabric underneath this so that it was a little bit more secure, just so that it wasn't as floppy in this spot. And I'm lining it up with about 1/4 of an inch past the edge of my foot, and that's just, that's what I figured out. You can mark it if you want, if that feels easier, but. That's my last one. I'm just going to cut this off even with the edge. I'm just going to cut off that extra fabric that was stabilizing it. And now I'll trim the thread. So I'm just going to show you what's going to happen with this. We've got the notebook cover, the outside. This is going to be here. It looks like that. These pieces will be the inside flaps that you're going to slide the cover onto. And that's going to be on one side. Actually, I want the pocket on the front. The elastic one's going to be on the back. And this is going to be basically the facing for these. So it's going to end up, it'll give it a little bit of stability and also finish the edge. So we're going to put those together. We'll be sewing here so that that's going to be inside like that. You won't see it. And that one's going to be inside there. I wanted to show you this so that you can figure out what side of the inside cover you want to use. So you can figure out which side you want to be on the front and which one on the back. I'm putting my pencils on the back, the pocket on the front, so that means I'm going to be finishing this edge right here. And I'll put my lining piece here. And I do have the pocket one a little bit bigger. That's okay. I'm just going to stitch down here. We're going to trim that up later. And on this one, I'm going to sew on this edge. So now I'm going to sew this with 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm just going to press these seams. So this is the piece with the pocket. I've got the lining on it, and I'm just going to top stitch that side. Okay, so I have these stacked up, and I'm just trimming them off so that they're a little bit more even. These are ready. And I'm just going to kind of set them up how they're going to end up, because we need to put our elastic loop on. So this is the back cover, and I want it to be looped like this, centered over where this elastic is. So basically, I'm just going to mark where that elastic is, and I'll be sewing it on the exterior in a loop like this. I went over it a bunch because I don't want that coming out. So now it's time to put the inside covers on, and we're going to place those right sides together. We should have that finished edge lining up with the edge of the spine. If it's off by a little bit, you can adjust, but make sure that that's still going to fit your book before you cut too much off. So now we're going to be sewing top, side, bottom, and the same thing on the other side. And we'll be going with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, no bigger. Okay, so I've sewn it once. Now I'm gonna turn it and try it on, and if it fits well, then I'm gonna sew it again and trim the seam allowance down as small as I can. We have some pressing, that's gonna be beautiful, and we'll put our button on like this. So it fits fine, and now I'm gonna turn it. I wanna cut this seam allowance very small, so I'm gonna sew it again just about 1/8 of an inch from that first stitch towards the seam allowance, just to make it stronger so that I can cut it and it's not gonna come apart on me. Now I just need to press it, and then we'll put the button on. So there it is. It fits really well. And the last thing to do is put a button on the front. So I'm gonna loop the elastic around and mark the spot where I want the button to go, right there. I'll take it out again. So I have a hand sewing needle with some thread, and I'm gonna go inside the front cover. Reach inside the front cover and tie a little knot.